Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is Wednesday, November 6, 2024. It's the day after the U.S. general elections 2024. And let me say off the bat that we really need to stop thinking in terms of elections because that is a whole capitalist managed spectacle and ordeal that, you watch the people on social media, the liberals who get very, very invested in the outcome of these elections. And, it's just being on the left at this point where things are not that organized, that's really beyond our control in terms of the outcome. And also, I mean, there's more continuity than there is change between administrations. So, things are really bad, I know. And Trump tends to play more, or whoever, Republicans in general tend to play more of the role of agitating the reactionary discourse and the vigilantism and things like that. What that means is that we need to get organized against that, and that doesn't mean at the ballot box. I mean, that's if you're pinning all of your hopes for withstanding fascism on the ballot box, you've already lost. So we need to move away from that first of all, and I'd just like to say that from the start. So beyond that, we're going to get into the chat, and right now there are 63 viewers at twitch.tv/socialism S4A, where we do these live streams and then later post them to YouTube, Patreon, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack after the fact. You can find all those links really anywhere off of the YouTube. If you click on the About, it'll take you to all those links. But anyway, we'll do a bunch of chat. I don't have a ton prepared. But for the last few weeks, I have been talking about the election because it's something that captures people's imagination. And, unfortunately, a lot of people do kind of go back to sleep politically between elections. We want to speak to the people who are paying attention while they're paying attention, I guess, and get whatever movement and agitation that we can out of that. But, we post year round here, and we're doing the education year round here, and we are speaking to the would-be vanguard here, which I think really has not been organized correctly, and I think that that's a development that we will see in the future at some point. But what I've been talking about a lot over the last few weeks is, a lot of people have decided that this election will be a referendum on the genocide that the Zionists are carrying out in Gaza, and which is not likely to stay contained in Gaza, but is already spreading to Lebanon and the West Bank and who knows where else. But, making this a referendum on that because, I think Biden has been terrible. And remember, they just pried his hands off the steering wheel like a couple of months ago and then put Kamala in as the candidate who got 0 delegates in 2020. And then there wasn't a primary this year because it was, quote, too late or whatever. And also vote for her to, quote, save democracy. The party that really has no internal democracy is going to, quote, save democracy. It's absurd. It's absurd. So the election as a referendum on the ongoing genocide that the current Democratic administration is fully enabling at every level, whether it's funding, whether it's arming, whether it's running diplomatic cover in the international bodies like the United Nations. The Zionists in Israel would not be able to do what they're doing without the support of the United States, period. They would not be able to do it. They might try, they might want to, they would not be able. The U.S., at the beginning of this, like a year ago, was parking warships off the coast in order to prevent it from flaring up into a regional war. In other words, to prevent anyone from stopping Israel from doing what they've been doing, committing the Holocaust that they're committing against the Palestinian people. So I wrote a post this morning on the YouTube community posts and also put it up on the Medium and Substack and other sites that we have going for S4A. I'll read that. But for the last few weeks, we've been talking about all this and how basically, as far as candidates running in the race, none of them were going to win. I do like to protest vote. So, personally, I did go and I voted green down the ticket. And then I voted for pro-democracy, pro-worker ballot referenda. And they're, across the United States, there's a bunch of really interesting ballot questions that were put directly to the voters. And that's actually where we've seen a lot of the progress being made, whether it's minimum wage or paid sick days or not sending people to jail for cannabis, etc. It's been despite the political parties, meaning the Democrats and Republicans, the dominant political parties. It's been despite them, not because of them. It's because people are voting directly on these things. And we see in this election, in a number of states where actually Kamala lost, those ballot measures won. So that means progressively minded pro-democracy forces were out and voting, and they didn't choose her. And it doesn't mean that they voted for Trump, but it means that they declined to vote for Harris. And why is that? You know, a lot of liberals are very, very confused about that right now. I think for a lot of the rest of us, it's not that confusing. But as far as the anti-genocide candidates who were on the ballot, you had the Green Party, which has pledged to deny U.S. aid to the Zionists in Israel, at least until they stop the genocide. And that's something we want. I voted for that. PSL also anti-genocide candidates. And the Greens were on the ballot in most of the places. There were some issues with write-in campaigns, but then the state said that they weren't going to count the votes anyway. This is illegal. The Green Party is bringing a lawsuit basically against the state about that. So there was some things like that. There were also, if you're watching the community posts recently on YouTube, PSL and the Greens did do mutual endorsements in states where the one or the other didn't have a candidate, even as an organized write-in on the ballot. So there was some cooperation there. And we were talking about how either of these parties, as a protest vote, which is not really, you know, a full referendum on all of their virtues and faults as parties, but, you know, as a protest vote against the genocide, either of those will do fine. Cornel West was also on the ballot. I've been highly critical of Cornel West from day one because he didn't even start out seeking the Green Party nomination. He started out seeking the MPP, Movement for a People's Party, nomination. And this is actually something I've seen a lot of people, because I was speaking highly of the Green Party, which is where I got started back in like the early 2000 era, you know, Nader, 9/11, Patriot Act, War on Terror, invasion of Iraq, all of that stuff. You know, that's something I'm very familiar with, and I see, you know, a lot of issues with the Greens. Their left wing is good, more of an eco-socialist type of thing. Some green anarchism, which as Marxists we're not as supportive of the anarchism, but eco-socialist left wing, but then more of like a contrarian, libertarian, populist right wing. And actually that right wing of the Greens, which I would consider Jill Stein to be part of, and I don't like Jill Stein, and I think she's a really bad candidate, there's a lot of overlap with the MPP people, the Jimmy Dore, Chris Hedges, Cornel West, those other people in the Movement for a People's Party, fake podcast grifting party that was basically collecting donations for like 5 years without running any candidates. And yeah, more of that kind of libertarian, contrarian, Brianna Joy Gray, you know, those Kim Ivermectinson, those kinds of people, Russell Brand, absolute fucking fascist New Ager, anti-vaxxers. That's the right wing of the Green Party. That's not the entire Green Party. Like DSA, you have the right wing and more, quote, moderate or center part of DSA, which is still attached to the Democratic Party, and then a more Marxist left wing of DSA, which is fighting that to some extent very successfully while doing actual year-round work. I've seen a lot of people, since I have spoken highly of the Greens, saying in the comments, I'm going to go join the Greens and see what I can do. I just want to point out to you, you know, it is going to be a struggle. Be aware. Some of the Green chapters are actually very left-wing, and you'll find communists there. Other times, you're going to find more kind of nuts, you know, because there's a real range of tendencies within the Green Party. You get actual hard left people, you get hippie capitalists, and you get the kind of libertarian, contrarian, like left libertarian types that I was just describing. So there are different tendencies, different branches are going to have different situations. So just be aware if you are doing that. You know, it's going to be a struggle. What I don't want is a lot of comments about, you told me to join the Green Party. First of all, I mean, the whole framing of that was at the bare minimum, people tend to either try to work within the Democratic Party or do nothing. That's something I haven't really been able to fully understand why people haven't been doing for decades already. But the bottom line is they haven't been doing it. So as far as what kind of state, in terms of situation or circumstances, you find your local Green Party in, that to some extent is like kind of an indicator of what the left has been up to and what the consequences of not organizing for fucking decades and doing all this futile working within the Democratic Party. And Bernie Sanders can tell you all about that. Just look at what happened with Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. He got nowhere, wound up just kissing Joe Biden's ass in 2020. There's actually a great clip of Jill Stein, of all people, from 2016. I mean, I say of all people. She's not like the worst, but I really, I would like to see somebody else representing the Green Party for sure. But she was on Democracy Now! In, I think, July of 2016, after it was clear Hillary was going to get the nomination at the Democratic National Convention, and Bernie was just going along with it. And the Green Party was opening up their ticket to Bernie. They were like, come on, you stole our platform. Come and run with us. And instead, no, he fed everybody into the Democratic Party. And he said flat out that it was because he didn't want to be blamed for getting some right-wing guy elected. Well, I'm sorry, but that modeling that kind of behavior, that reasoning and thinking, it's what's keeping everybody in the Democratic Party. And we need to get people out of that party. It's an insane death cult. And no real progress is possible within the Democratic Party. I've been saying this from day one of starting up this channel. Some of those videos are no longer online, but I was talking a lot in February, March, April, May of 2020, when the Democratic primary was still going on, the second one, criticizing Bernie Sanders. He had been an independent for a long time, didn't get into the Green Party or anything like that. And there's actually a Counterpunch article that claims that Bernie had a secret agreement with the Vermont Democratic Party that they wouldn't seriously oppose him as long as he didn't organize a third party. They're really terrified of that. But you know what? Actually, I mentioned the Jill Stein clip from Democracy Now! Let me grab that real quick to hear, just to remind people of where we are in this whole process. We're like 8 years into, well, first you had 8 years before that, so 16 years into it, Obama as a fake progressive in the Democratic Party. He got into office and just, was basically a centrist Reaganite. And then in 2016, it looked like, oh, maybe there will be a real progressive, like Bernie Sanders, who has spent most of his political life outside the Democratic Party. And then not. But there's a clip from Democracy Now! Of Jill Stein talking about the situation and to Bernie Sanders, and this is 8 years ago. Let's play that now.
Yes, and good morning, Amy and Juan. It's great to be with you. This is kind of what many people have foreseen all along. It was kind of in the cards. The Democratic machine has very steeply tilted the playing field from the beginning by limiting the debates, limiting the exposure of Bernie Sanders, some very questionable election practices, 100,000 voters disappearing from the rolls in Brooklyn. Some very questionable things that happened in the Democratic primary in California, where independent voters thought they could just show up at the polls and cast a vote for Bernie Sanders, but were unable to by large numbers, and huge discrepancies between the polls in advance and the actual outcome of the election. So, and needless to say, the superdelegates have massively tipped the playing field. And the announcement the night before by major news organizations that Hillary Clinton had already clinched it, hard to call that just a coincidence, seems tailor-made for discouraging people from actually turning out and exercising their right to vote. So this is what the Democratic Party has done for decades, many decades, in fact. And after the election of George McGovern in 1972 as a peace candidate, I should say his election to the nomination of the Democratic Party, the party changed the rules to steeply tilt that playing field, creating superdelegates and Super Tuesdays that make it very hard for a grassroots campaign to prevail. And over the years, the party has allowed principled candidates to be seen and heard, but has, at the end of the day, sabotaged them in one way or the other, often through fear campaigns and smear campaigns, in the same way that Bernie is being called a spoiler now and has been for some weeks. Dennis Kucinich was redistricted and basically, you know, taken off the political map. We saw Jesse Jackson, the victim of a smear campaign. People remember the Dean scream that was used against Howard Dean as a peace candidate who was doing well. So in many ways, the Democratic Party creates campaigns that fake left while it moves right and becomes more corporatist, more militarist, more imperialist. This is why we say it's hard to have a revolutionary campaign inside of a counter-revolutionary party. That's why we're here as the Green Party, to build a place where a revolutionary movement can truly grow with a political voice.
Well, Jill Stein, you've been trying for months to reach out to Bernie Sanders because you acknowledge that there are many similarities in your program and his to join forces. What's been the response from the Sanders campaign, and what are you hopeful for now?
Well, the response over the last several weeks has been the same as the response over the last several years. And in fact, the Green Party reached out to Bernie Sanders before the last election to see if he might be interested in running on the Green Party ballot line. And that was in 2011. And basically, we haven't heard back yet. So I'm not holding my breath that we are going to. And in fact, I think it was just yesterday that Senator Sanders announced that he would be meeting with President Obama to basically stay the course and to essentially move his campaign inside of the Democratic Party, which I think is a mistake and would be essentially an abandonment of the movement that has been built. We've seen many very principled and powerful efforts to reform the Democratic Party from within over the course of many years, and Democratic Party keeps marching to the right. So, you know, my hope, as Senator Sanders himself said, is that this is a movement, it's not a man. And my hope is that the movement will continue. And we've offered I've offered, basically, to put everything on the table and to see how we can work together and explore what it would take in order for that to happen.
Well, let's go to Bernie Sanders.
Joint ticket, for example.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's go to Bernie Sanders last July speaking at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce when he was asked if he would run on a third-party ticket if he failed to win the Democratic nomination.
If it happens that I do not win that process, would I run outside of the system? No, I made the promise that I would not, and I'll keep that promise. And let me add to that, and the reason for that is I do not want to be responsible for electing some right-wing Republican to be president of the United States of America.
So that is Bernie Sanders last July. You talked about the possibility of a joint ticket. Are you saying that you would, I mean, you are not the presidential nominee of the Green Party yet. You're running in different state primaries and conventions. But are you suggesting that the Green Party would consider him being the presidential candidate, whether or not he would consider this?
It would obviously take a major change of rules for that to happen. But what I'm saying is that if Senator Sanders made the case that now he understood, after the very disturbing experiences of the last many months and the way that he's been mistreated and beaten up by the party, perhaps he has a different view of the potential to create revolution inside of a counter-revolutionary party. Maybe he has come to see the necessity for independent third parties to actually move this movement forward. That would be, that would be a game changer if he made the case that he has come to understand the critical need to build the Green Party as the political voice of that revolution.
I was watching this the other day and I was like, wow, it's kind of crazy what we've been through with trying to organize the left. And it's just wild. By the way, I'm looking at the Twitch. Welcome to the 87 people who are here right now listening. I think we're going to have a good stream, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions and interesting discussion. But I think that this made total sense, was Bernie Sanders should have led a Dem exit into the Green Party, which is really where Bernie Sanders supporters belonged. I feel like we're still basically stuck in this moment, except that, or like the majority of people are still kind of stuck in this moment of like, what do we do? And yet people are really still clinging to that Democratic Party, and you're just not going to get anywhere. So anyway, I think some people were confused because I was speaking, of the Greens as the obvious bare minimum for people to have been doing, and they haven't been doing it. I would still see it as step up at this point over being totally unorganized. And I also don't think that, first of all, the Green Party platform is very far off from where we would need it to be. Sometimes people are like, oh, you mean that we should join the Green Party and hijack it? No, it's already a mass left party. Like, read the platform. It's already Medicare for all and all the other stuff, and better. In fact, Bernie Sanders watered it down when he took it. Anyway, it's just trying to have a conversation about politics in this country that makes sense is an extreme challenge at times. But let me just go ahead and read the community post that I made today, and hopefully that'll just help to clarify. I think that most people did get this, by the way, the first time around. But there are some people I've seen I just saw somebody today. I unsubscribed when you started talking about the Green Party because electoralism won't get us socialism. I'm sorry, did I say that it would? I never said that. So it's like unlearnable to some people what the conversation I'm even trying to have is here. Like I said, I think most people got it. It still amazes me how difficult it seems to be for a lot of people to think about this. But anyway, here's the post from today. The U.S. election results aren't fully counted yet, but it's looking like Kamala needs a miracle to win the last few states in play. So far, it looks like Trump got 3 million fewer votes than in 2020, while Harris got a whopping 15 million fewer votes than Biden did in 2020. That's a huge drop and a stunning statement of no confidence in a candidate and party that pissed on voters' heads and told us it was raining. Dems have, and all the Bidenomics, things have never been better. Things are terrible. We're living through a cost of living crisis, and we're probably on the brink of another 2008 type event. Actually, you know what? I've been looking for a place to post this, and this is as good a time as any to put this graphic on the screen, which is U.S. banks' unrealized gains or losses on investment securities. Does not look real good. So we've done a number of videos on the topic of the probably impending 2008 type crash. And what the situation is right now, there's a number of metrics of this, but you can see this is from Reuters. U.S. banks' unrealized gains or losses on investment securities. So that goes back to 2008, and you could see at this time that there was a significant deficit. And then again, we had kind of a crisis in 2019 where in September of 2019, there was an event called Repo Madness when the repurchase markets started seizing up. So it was like the beginning of a liquidity crisis. They bailed that out. The pandemic started like a couple of months later, and so kind of swept away normal economic activity because of that public health crisis. A lot of things had to be suspended by decree, basically because of the virus. So that kind of didn't get entirely dealt with in the most quote unquote natural, capitalism is not natural, but in terms of the logic of capitalism, usually it runs, it has its boom period and then it has its bust, and it keeps cycling back and forth between the two. Overall, over time, the tendency of the rate of profit is to drop. And by the time it starts really circling the drain, getting close to zero, this is really where capitalism starts going into dire crisis. And the political and social manifestations of that get really crazy. In fact, that's really why neoliberalism started. There was a massive profitability crisis in the 60s and 70s, huge inflation in the 70s, major economic problems. They started doing neoliberalism late 70s into the 80s. Ronald Reagan was really the main harbinger of that, came out touting it as morning in America and a new vision. People ate it up because they're not class conscious. And then they started cutting everything to the bone in terms of social services and things in order to protect profits and to try to bolster sagging profits, which will help them in the short term, but in the long term, it's futile. And so they have to get crazier and crazier. They have to turn the screws harder and harder to fight to keep profits up because, again, the natural tendency over time, decade after decade, century after century, is for the rate of profit to fall and eventually down to a level of crisis that capitalism just cannot recover from. And this is why capitalism cannot go on forever. It must be replaced by socialism. It just simply cannot go on forever. But that's where neoliberalism came from. It was a crackdown by the capitalists, and we're still in this period. And it got ramped up after 2008 with the whole austerity, shared sacrifice thing. That's going to just keep happening, and it's not going to turn around. I really need people to get that through their heads. The Democrats are not going to fix that. No amount of, better liberal policy is going to fix that. Liberalism as a project has run its course. They can no longer really govern capitalism in that way. But anyway, what you're looking at on the screen here, what is an unrealized gain or loss? This is basically something where if you had to sell today, it would come up as a loss, but you haven't sold it yet. Or an unrealized gain, same thing. Except when it's as far negative as it is right now, those are losses. Okay, those are negative gains, i.e. losses. So basically, the banks, we're looking at a very high likelihood of massive bank failures and possibly the end of the banking system as we know it, because already the U.S. went from dozens of major banks down to 4. Just 4. They've been consolidated that much through bank failures, and then the surviving banks buy up the assets of the other ones, and it gets reorganized in order to protect the capitalist class as a whole. Okay, so there is competition within capitalism, but the capitalists also realize that they must collaborate to some degree in order to maintain their collective, exploitation of people as a class, of the rest of the population as a class. So when the shit hits the fan in this case, what are they going to do? They've already they've been doing quantitative easing as much as they possibly can. There's not a lot more room for them to keep doing quantitative easing, which is, in other words, just pumping in money. They still have ways that they can do it by stealth, but at some point you start risking hyperinflation if you go that route. But so at this point, what this means, the banks are holding on to things that if they had to sell them, they would have to sell at a loss. And so what they're desperately trying to do is, you can see there's 2 different colors. There's available for sale securities and held to maturity securities. The ones that they're holding to maturity, it means that they're not trying to sell those. The securities, meaning like corporate bonds and things like that, they're letting them expire. They're letting them run to the end of their expiration period. So that's however much time, the bond was issued for. They're just trying to hold on to them until they run their course, and then it's done. The darker red, the dark maroon, is available for sale. They're trying to sell those, and as you can see overall, they will take big losses when they do sell them. So this could be a total cracking up of the bank system. Whether this will result in the nationalization of the bank system under capitalism, that's a possibility. We'll see. But people on the left need to understand that nationalizing the banks under capitalism doesn't help you as a working person. It helps capitalists to maintain capitalism. Okay? So in a socialist country, after you've had a proletarian takeover, and then the dismantling of the bourgeois ruling apparatus and the construction of a proletarian one, new institutions which rule for the proletariat in a different way, then yeah, you would have a national bank, but it would be a socialist bank, not a capitalist one, different scenario. So whatever's coming around the corner, the point is here that, you know, the Democratic Party and the things that it stands for probably has run its course, because again, this is a reflection of the underlying economic system. The politics is a reflection of the economics, and as capitalism goes into severe decay, the politics have to become more fascist in order to hang on to control of this and to prevent a proletarian revolution. And so right now, for returning subscribers on the channel, we have a pinned audiobook, Best Anti-Fascist Book Ever. It's Fascism and Social Revolution from 1935, third edition by Dutt. Listen to this. It is in 2 parts. It's 13 hours total. It's crucial for people to understand the nature of the era in which we now find ourselves and what is around the corner. And yes, bourgeois electoralism and liberal political parties of the Democratic Party's persuasion are not going to be really part of that future. This is why they keep moving right. You know, the sort of Kyle Kalinskis and the other poli-sci type people who, you know, really look at things very superficially in terms of like swing states and the electoral college and all this kind of stuff. This is very surface level stuff. Overall, the needs of the capitalist class are what gets represented in the capitalist political system. And that is ultimately responsible for why the Democratic Party is moving so far to the right. Do not be content with mere surface level explanations. That's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at probably the really final stages of capitalism. It's going to be so ugly. But let's go back to the post. Dems have been going against what the base wants. In other words, the working class, which is the majority of the population, overwhelming majority of the population, time and time again, in order to deliver what their 1% owners want. For example, only 8% of Democratic voters are actively against Medicare for all. We've covered that in earlier videos. We're talking about it a lot in 2020. It was one of the major differences between Bernie Sanders and all the other candidates was Medicare for all. He was the only one, to his credit, when he got on cable news and all the other coverage that they were obliged to give him because he was a major candidate, he would get on there and with that foot in the door, he would talk about Medicare for all. He did keep the door open for that. And then as soon as he dropped out, which he did way too early, within 24 hours, any mention of Medicare for all was scrubbed from mainstream discourse. You can see the effect that that had. But at that time, there was a poll, and it showed only 8% of the Democratic base was opposed to Medicare for all, meaning 92% of the Democratic Party, it's like 50 million people or something, it's 40 or 50 million people, was either neutral or actively wanted Medicare for all. Yet, nobody does it. None of the politicians do it. Why is that? Well, they're going against the base. Why? Because they don't serve the base. They serve their 1% owners, the billionaires and corporations that fund the party. And it's not always one-to-one the exact same people who fund the Republicans. Some of the ruling class is very partisan in that way, but a lot of them fund both sides. And overall, it evens out. It's people from the same class. And they generally do share an agenda and a set of priorities. You know, but I didn't hear a single Democrat mention Medicare for all this time around. Jill Stein was talking about it. AOC turned out to be a huge fraud. And, you know, was upholding Joe Biden this year, even after, like, the New York Times was like, get rid of Joe Biden. He can't put a sentence together. AOC was still stumping for Joe Biden. That's how bad she pivoted to the right. That's how bad her opportunism and careerism is. Like, all that's over. Bernie's over. The squad is over. And the left needs to come to terms with the fact you need to jump ship from this party. Okay? I mean, the time to really do this was like 20, 30 years ago. But slow learners, I guess. I don't know. So the only time that going against the base works for them electorally is when the Republican Party manages to make itself extra hated in voters' very recent memory. And some examples of that are 2020. Trump managed to be a little bit more hated than the Democrats. Great, he lost. Another time was 2008. George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And Obama purported to be a progressive. Okay, Obama won against John McCain. But, and then you had 2012, which is a little bit of an outlier. Prices were still very low following the once in a century, quote unquote, or once in a lifetime global financial crisis of 2008. And Mitt Romney was not very charismatic. And there's an advantage for incumbents, and Obama won re-election. But like in general, Democrats can only win against the super hated Republicans. And then in this case with Trump, it's like that's how fast people's memories, it was just over. It's like, oh, 4 years. Who's this guy? I don't remember him. He was just the president. Maybe you remember. No, I don't. Let's give him a chance. He's going to drain the swamp. He was just in for 4 years. He didn't drain the swamp. Let's give him a chance. It's crazy. So the country just careens back. By which I mean the electorate just careens back and forth between terrible positions, and the memory is so fucking short. It's unbelievable. People's lives are not good. I think that that's overall what's happening. People, their expectations for life are dropping. They're seeing their kids grow up with really shitty lives. People are angry, and it's getting unhinged. And it's just beginning. It is just beginning. Go back to the unrealized losses and gains screen. They're talking about a soft landing. I highly doubt it. And we get another real hard landing just, 16 years after the global financial crisis? Or, 17 years if it's next year or whatever. Not going to be good. Not going to be good. It's also, by the way, we've talked about the corporate debt wall in the EU and also in the US. The EU is actually going to hit a little bit earlier than the US, but all this corporate debt is coming up for renewal. And if they can't refinance at the higher interest rates, a lot of companies are going to have to lay people off, go out of business. They've already stopped hiring in a lot of cases. If you look at employment statistics in the US, and they stop hiring before they start firing, but it's when they start doing the firing, that's a recession. And then things tend to come unglued very rapidly from there. They've been holding off and holding off and holding off. In fact, part of my thinking is the Democrats, if you're looking for a reason why they threw it, maybe they didn't want to be in office when the economic crisis hits. Just a thought. In fact, I've seen many times, it seems to me more like the Republicans are on the cleanup crew for recessions and things like that. They come in and do all the cutting to try to get the economy started again. And the Democrats tend to be more during boom periods, which liberals not really understanding. These are just cyclical things that happen in capitalism. They often credit the Democrats. Like you would hear that in the 90s. Bill Clinton ran this big budget surplus, and then Bush and Cheney got in and, destroyed it, and we had a big recession with the dot-com crash. That actually started earlier, and it's not caused by the president, but because you can't look deeper at the economic system, you think that it is, but you're being misled. You're mistaking, cause and effect, and not understanding that fundamentally. Anyway, unfortunately for the Democrats, it looks like 2024 wasn't one of those times where, people did not turn out, it seems, for Kamala Harris. But beyond the elections, what we're witnessing more broadly is the final period of an entire economic system, capitalism. As advanced monopoly capitalism, also known as capitalist imperialism, or just simply imperialism in the Marxist-Leninist sense, continues to decay, it will become more and more fascist all around. And there is no way out of this decay. Capitalism is born, it grows, we have an ascending period of capitalism, it overthrows feudalism, then it becomes the dominant mode in society. The capitalist class becomes the ruling class of society, supplanting the old ruling class. Then the capitalists, by running their system, proletarianizes the population, turning all of the peasants and farmers and merchants and small craftsmen and artisans into wage workers, into proletarians. So as it goes, as Engels said in, I think it was one of the anti-Düring parts, it's just like running a battery. The battery runs out as it converts its chemicals. It's just a function of time. Capitalism does the same to society. It changes the class composition of the society, just as running a battery changes the chemical composition of the contents of the battery. And in the process, it produces energy, and capitalism produces wealth. It produces goods and services, which are unequally held among the different classes of society because the capitalists legally own them, and the workers are just paid enough wages basically to allow us to subsist. And if we're extra good in one of the imperialist countries, they give us some super profits on top so that we can indulge in that and get our minds off of just base level subsistence, and that helps to stave off revolutionary sentiment. Anyway, it will become more and more fascist all around, and there's really no reverse of that. Once capitalism becomes the dominant mode, it starts to consolidate and consolidate. You get the emergence of the military-industrial complex. Different imperialist powers in different countries start to compete with each other for the redivision of the world as they exploit, just as they initially exploited the proletariat within their country, the country as a whole starts to exploit other entire countries. And this is basically the transition that capitalism went into in the early 20th century. And then by 1914, you get the first major inter-imperialist conflict, World War I, where the different imperial powers were vying for the redivision of the world imperialist system. Then, you had a lull of about 20 years, and then another major contest where that was also an anti-communist war, a war against socialism, war against the proletarian revolution. That's why things had become fascist at that point. But again, it was another competition between the Axis, Germany, Japan, Italy, the emerging large capitalist powers, which are now in the G7, fighting with the more established ones. And now today, World War III seems to be around the corner, where another rising bloc is now fighting the G7 as a whole. You have BRICS against the G7, although that isn't you turn into a full-fledged world war yet, but we do have, whether it's there's competition in Africa. China is trying to industrialize in Africa, and Russia is also vying to replace the US and France, especially in northern, West Africa, vying to replace the US and France in terms of political influence. This is imperialism. This is the competition for the redivision of the world imperialist system. And at some point, the policy turns out of the business and political negotiation realm. And if they can't settle things to their satisfaction there, it turns into a war. And then the war also has the added bonus for them of disposing of capital. Wars destroy things. They destroy buildings and other capital, which then have to be rebuilt. So that gives global capitalism a little bit of a reset. So the world wars are big safety valves for capitalism, the world imperialist system generally. And we haven't had that. There was the Cold War for a long time. Not quite the same. Now you really have, as the socialist camp has disappeared, you have the classic setup of two rival capitalist blocs. And it's not that simple. It's not super black and white, because there's lots of trade between the two blocs as well. So, I mean, to some extent, the conflict is for show, for the population, to prevent proletarian revolution. The capitalists come together and they make the workers kill each other for their sake, along the lines of bourgeois nationalism, in order to prevent the workers ganging up and overthrowing the capitalist rule. So, I mean, that's another major thing that's happening here. As the BRICS publicists go out there and based Russia, based China, this and that, remember that the capitalists in these countries want to prevent proletarian revolution in their own country and in other countries, because they can't exploit them if that happens. It means the death of their class. So, they want a bigger seat at the table, etc., but there ultimately is collaboration between capitalists for their shared fate and the shared fate of the world imperialist system, which will vanish if there is widespread socialist revolution. What this means, that it will decay irrevocably and become more and more fascist, is that there will be no mainstream political options capable of presenting anything else but more fascism. We're seeing that very clearly now. And in fact, we should be very skeptical of any mainstream political options which seem to be non-fascist, which are presented as non-fascist, as they most likely will be illusions used to serve the system's needs, not ours. They'll be used mainly to buy the capitalists more time. And so again, you read Fascism and Social Revolution, there's a big thing about this, about the role of social democracy in preventing revolution and buying the capitalists more time to build fascism behind the scenes. And then when their fascist dictatorship is ready to be launched, well, social democracy has served its purpose at that point, and it is discarded, and fascism is brought out. What I support now, listen closely, and again, these are just my thoughts, but I say listen closely just for the sake of I'm tired of fielding comments misunderstanding or misrepresenting what I'm saying. It just gets really tedious for me as a person running this channel. Is I support continuing to pull progressive working people out of the insane anti-democratic death cult of the quote-unquote Democratic Party and getting them, the progressively minded working people, to organize outside of it, either in a mass left party like the Greens, or, for those interested in vanguard studies, a communist party, which in my opinion has yet to be formed, because most efforts to form a large U.S. vanguard party have resulted in revisionist failures. I can comment more on that. In fact, we were talking about that in the Why Not PSL video, but I can talk about that more. But then if you do form that communist party, that in turn can help to advise the mass organizations, which are intended to organize the progressive advanced masses and some of the middle masses who are not going to meet the criteria of joining a communist party. They're not going to engage in that much study, and they can't do the militancy or be involved in maybe revolutionary planning in the same way. In fact, Lenin talks about how the Bolsheviks would have their membership open at times and then close off their membership to new members, because when you open up membership, a lot of people who really aren't Marxist will flood the ranks, and you got to kind of watch that. One way around this is like mass party guided by communists, separate from the vanguard itself. Anyway, such an effort is not, hear me again, such an effort is not, NOT, primarily about winning elections within the dying capitalist system. So for all the people, I unsubscribed after you started talking about electoralism. No, that's a protest vote. It is quite different, and what I kept saying in every post, and it doesn't seem to matter how many posts I put it in, at a bare minimum, if you're doing nothing, why haven't you been doing the Green Party? That's, to me, just a no-brainer. But as I've said, it's not about voting. It's about building the party for year-round activity, the same way that people are doing that with DSA. And when you've built the party to, that level, and it's participating in all of the local organizing that's going on, labor union support, tenant union support, it's a no-brainer to me for labor unions to pull their endorsements from the Dems and switch it over, and for DSA to pull its endorsements from the Dems and switch it over. There's also talk of DSA like running their own candidates. I know that they do that sometimes, but you've got some infrastructure there in the Green Party. I don't think programmatically it can't be used. Like, I don't think that that's the reason why it's not being used. I think people write it off. And again, all the attention gets put on the Democratic Party. But anyway, it is primarily not about winning elections within the dying capitalist system, although undoubtedly some wins will be made here and there as you run candidates. But again, it's not about running to win, and it can be a strategic question whether to run or not for specific seats based on what the Congress is doing or whatever. But what is it? It is about, and I'll just skip ahead for a second, advertising the existence of an alternative. Number two, disrupting capitalist politics as usual. In other words, if you do elect candidates, you're trying to disrupt the capitalist system from within, and building class consciousness for an independent fighting spirit among the workers in preparation for the much more serious struggles ahead, struggles which won't take the neat and tidy form of a capitalist managed election. But until workers go through the process of detaching their thinking and anxieties, their whole emotional political life, from those of the dying bourgeoisie, we won't be able to envision a clear path forward into socialism. So it's about creating an independent proletarian class perspective, which you cannot do inside the Democratic Party, being an imperialist party dominated by 1% money and 1% dictates. You just can't do it from within there. All right. So you get people out thinking about their own needs, their own interests. This is preparatory for the much bigger fight we are going to face as capitalism continues to decay. But I skipped a little bit in the middle there. As you make wins and as you just build up this organization, it's not about, in terms of a strategic goal, you're not trying to pull the Democrats left. That's not the goal. It's not like, oh, we really need to pull the Democrats left. How do we do it? Well, you can't do it from within. Truly, you cannot pull them left from within. But you can from outside. In other words, that is a byproduct. It is an inevitable byproduct of our independent organizing that the Dems will try to recapture people who have left their party for a left party. Like right now, the left isn't that organized, and they don't have to pander to us at all. Okay? They're content with just sort of losing elections in a non-obvious way. As that gets more and more obvious, okay, and it becomes clearer and clearer that, you know, compared to the 40 million registered Democrats or whatever, that there's 5 or 10 million registered, you know, Greens or whatever the party's going to be, that's going to become very clear that the Democrats have lost people to that. It's undoubtedly going to affect their behavior in some way. That's why we have to, as I wrote in here, we have to guard against that. So we can expect and must guard against some amount of left pandering from Dems as a byproduct, as more and more disillusioned workers flee their ranks, the ranks of the Democrats, to join an independent, meaning anti-corporate money, anti-billionaire money option. So again, advertising the existence of an alternative, there is another world possible, disrupting capitalist politics as usual. You run your candidate, you get into the debate, or you run your ads, you get into social media, whatever the forum is, and you talk about how imperialism is decaying. The working class needs to, well, all the things I'm saying here. The working class needs to detach, you know, jump ship, because they're going down. It's the Titanic. And if you want a future, it's not in capitalism, and it's not in these political parties which represent capitalism. And kind of coming back to the vanguard thing for a minute, I think that the existing quote-unquote vanguard parties that are there, like CPUSA, for example, this is a relic left over from the 20th century and that entire course of events, which still haven't entirely run their course. It's a relic from the era of having a USSR and the Comintern, and then even after the USSR became more social imperialist, after China also got taken over by the capitalist roaders, after the USSR was fully liberalized and flat out got destroyed, and there was a counter-revolution to bring in a fully capitalist, openly capitalist government, CPUSA is like still out there touting the Dems and the like left labor coalition, which died decades ago. That is nothing more than an impediment to the growth of the left to meet the needs of the current situation, in my opinion. They follow blatantly anti-Marxist Leninist lines. The opportunism is off the charts. And that's going to be an impediment to the kind of vanguard development that we actually need. PSL has the same issue as far as being revisionist on China. And I made this point in a recent video, the second most recent video, why not PSL? Because you can look back on their website, what they were saying about quote-unquote socialism with Chinese characteristics in 2007 and so on, was that it was revisionist. And they laid out a very good argument that that was obviously revisionist. The capitalist restoration was it wasn't fully complete, but it was very advanced. And there was basically just like a ghost of a chance that it wouldn't be fully restored at some point in the near future. Now PSL has reversed its course and is praising socialism with Chinese characteristics, at a minimum not criticizing it as revisionist, which this is actually a matter of really important, of crucial strategic importance. If you have a supposed vanguard party openly touting what it knows to be revisionist as the way forward, and that is your definition of socialism, like, in other words, that socialism with Chinese characteristics meets the definition of socialism, you cannot help but mislead the revolutionary movement coming up. And it spawns people like Infracell. When we read excerpts in MAGA Communism is Revisionism, when we read excerpts from, and believe me, you can read the rest, it's just Duganist ranting against leftism. But anyway, there was a few really key passages in there talking about how private property will exist long into the future, and capitalism will only disappear when people stop trying to uphold it. In other words, when the capitalists just give up at some point in the distant future. It's basically Kautskyism. But that's, I think, a direct spin-off of the kind of quote-unquote market socialism of China, because that's like their line. It's just, we're going to allow capitalism forever, basically. Somehow the bourgeoisie, even though they're getting richer and richer and expanding their holdings, they're not going to take over politically? Are you serious? That's, for people who constantly are ranting about you're not being dialectical, yeah, that's not a static situation. That is going to change. The bourgeoisie, that's the whole point of being a capitalist, is to multiply capital, to get richer. And with that, they're not going to be able to hold them back indefinitely. So, yeah, people would be like, well, why was the USSR allowed to do the NEP, but China isn't? Well, so first of all, Lenin thought that the NEP, because of how hopelessly backward Russia was and devastated by World War I, almost a decade of war between World War I and the Revolutionary Civil War, that in order to just feed people and make clothing and stuff, they had to tolerate the existing capitalists and then later socialize it. And he thought that this would go on for some time, kind of like it has in China, actually. However, what they found in practice, and we are scientific socialists, we need to learn from real-world results, is that Stalin got in and they were trying to manage the NEP, and the netmen, the capitalists that they were tolerating, were extraordinarily counter-revolutionary. It was a severe problem. And then they had to do the break in 1928 and be like, yeah, NEP is over, out of the pool. And they, from that time on, had to wage like a second revolution to continue with the collectivization. And, people gripe, anti-Bolshevik people gripe about like, the forced collectivization. They had no choice. It was either that or full capitalist restoration. So, those were the results of the experiment, and that's what they had to do to preserve and keep building socialism in the main, in the country. And they were able to do that, but that's what they found. It's a very, very tenuous situation. And so China, thinking that they can just do this indefinitely, there will be no political... the bourgeoisie is inside the party. That was also not allowed in the USSR. So just huge, huge, huge differences. In fact, we'll be doing a video that explores a lot more of this. But anyway, when the party knows better, when people like Brian Becker know better, and they write whole articles like the one that we read, the 2007 article in the Why Not PSL video, like, that the people are not representing their actual knowledge and beliefs. I don't know how you trust a party like that. And again, a lot of things have changed since COVID and since the lead up to this new global financial crisis, the invasion of Ukraine, which obviously there was a lead up to that. I still think that a lot of the messaging on that is not convincing to a lot of people, very muddled, because they're trying to do lesser evilism. They're like, yeah, Russia invaded, but it's really the U.S.'s fault. What? It's an inter-imperialist conflict, period. But they try to deny that Russia and BRICS are imperialist in the Leninist sense of advanced monopoly capitalism. They absolutely are. They're vying for control and redivision of the world imperialist system. This is exactly what Lenin wrote about, and you can find it in a variety of... We have a playlist, actually, on revolutionary defeatism, which is the position established by Lenin of not taking sides in an inter-imperialist war. That's what they're doing. That has dire consequences. You cannot support that under any circumstances, period. And again, go back and listen to Lenin on that. So this is where we are. As far as the vanguard, I'm not seeing it. Any party of any size is upholds socialism with Chinese characteristics. Then you get the Trotskyists, who are Trotskyists. People often ask, what is the problem with Trotskyists? We've started the anti-Trotskyism playlist. We also have the Lenin against Trotsky playlist. Trotskyism is not Leninism. It's pretty much that simple. But then in practice, also, Trotskyists are famously impossible to work with. Their organizations have... Well, anyway, we'll leave it there. We'll see if there's any more specific questions. We've been discussing this because there are a lot of Trotskyist organizations in the US and UK in particular. Stalin referred to Trotskyism as the advanced detachment of the bourgeoisie because it is basically reformist Menshevism in disguise, dressed up with pretty sophisticated Marxist quotations and things like that. But in the end, it's not Bolshevism. And Trotsky had an okay period where he relented with his own theories, the permanent revolution, and he just started carrying out the Bolshevik line. And that was fine, and he aided in the revolution. Then after that, when he saw an opportunity to try to vie for power with the vacuum left by Lenin, he went back to his own Trotskyist lines that Lenin fought against decade in and decade out prior to the revolution, and trying to uphold them as Leninist. And anyway, we have a number of recent audiobooks on that topic. And you get groups like the RCA right now that basically disguise their Trotskyism. You can find it if you dig down in there. They're just attached to the IMT, International Marxist Tendency. And but they don't really come out with it. They mention Trotsky like once or twice on their website. I think they do a little bit more in their videos, but they try to conceal that. I've gotten into arguments with people in the comments saying that they joined the RCA and the RCA is not Trotskyist. I'm sorry, they have you fooled, and you really got to ask why they do that. So anyway, Vanguard, what were the more recent efforts to build a Vanguard party? You had the PCUSA, split off of CPUSA, turned out to be a bunch of Nazballs. And then you've got the ACP, C in quotes there, exact same thing. It's a Duginist fascist party claiming to be a communist vanguard. Yeah, we need to reorient the struggle, build the labor movement. You'll get a vanguard out of this. And obviously, I got into another argument with somebody who's actually been a supporter of the channel for a while and who I've DM'd with and who has been in the streams. And they're like, you're against forming a vanguard party. What? Why do you think I've been reading out Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc. on this channel day after day after day? I would like to see the emergence of a vanguard party, absolutely. But we also have to and this person wasn't from the US, which is another thing I found consistently in the people that were criticizing, what are you talking about, a mass party and this and that? They're not in the US. They don't even know. We don't have the basics here. We don't even have a shitty SOCDEM party. Not that we really want one, but the point is there's nothing. The labor movement is at a century-long low. It's a terrible overall situation. And just, trying to make a vanguard out of nothing is not possible. Because some of it comes out of book study. Some of it comes out of being involved in pitched struggles, like in the labor movement in particular, which is the main vehicle for the proletarian class organizing. Labor unions are sort of your basic thing, and they're so compromised. There needs to be a return to militancy as living conditions dwindle and everything else. You'll get the sort of desperation and lack of comfort even in a very advanced country like the US as the inequality gets worse and worse and worse. Yes, the US is a very rich country. The average person has no actual meaningful claim to most of that wealth and lives in pretty bad conditions. A lot of people do. And that's only going to get worse as the inequality gets worse, which it's definitely going to do. So yeah, we're trying to foster the kind of knowledge that a vanguard party would be imparting. And what can we do with that for now? I don't know, but go network with your local left. Find out what's going on. Take what you learned on the channel, and as you become involved and a member of different organizations locally, try to apply it. And then the other thing, people confuse this with entryism. Oh my God, that is not entryism. Entryism, for people are like, oh, you're advocating entryism into the Green Party. No, I'm not. Entryism is a specific thing where one organization, like an established organization or party, mass enters another one, usually for the purpose of a hostile takeover. Sometimes it's not hostile, but a lot of times it is. This is tied particularly to Trotskyism because after Trotsky got, expelled from the USSR and all that, the Trotskyist parties were not welcome in the Comintern affiliated parties in the earlier 20th century. And so they would have to make do with existing parties. So you'd get like a bunch of Trotskyists together in a Trotskyist party, and then they would mass enter a non-communist party. So that's with the intent of taking it over. That's entryism. What I'm advocating is for random listeners of this channel who are not affiliated in anything and asking, what can I do? I'm telling you, go network with people in your local left. Find what's there. Maybe it's DSA. Maybe it's the Greens. Maybe it's whatever. But get involved. Get phone numbers. Connect with people. Find comrades. And yeah, also study Marxism. And then apply what you learned in your local struggle. I'm not trying to micromanage that. But it's just crazy. I was talking with somebody about that in the comments, and they got it, eventually. But sometimes people just look at this and they're looking for any reason to complain. What I'm trying to do is, I've been doing this for like 20, 25 years, as far as being on the left, being concerned with the anti-war movement, and a lot of things. How do we get a serious progressive movement for socialism going in this country? Why doesn't it exist already? That was like a major question that I had. I was like, why isn't there more of an established left movement in the US? And I did a lot of studies on that. And then it started coming back after 2008. You got like Occupy, still very inchoate, very unformed, very disorganized. Occupy wouldn't even take up a platform. That's how much they were like resisting really. Well, they're like, we don't want to be a single issue group. Great. That's what a platform is for. Take your top 10 demands that keep coming up the most in the Occupy meetings, whether it's foreclosures, healthcare, the wars, etc. Okay, make a platform of like 10 issues. That's so hard? No, it isn't. They wouldn't do that. Bernie Sanders came along. That to me was the next, like if it was in the 2000s, it was the anti-war movement. Then, around 2010, it was Occupy. Then later, 2016, 15 through 2020 was Bernie Sanders. What now? What do we do now? And that's the other issue with people sort of trickling into the Greens or trickling into DSA now. What would have made that a lot easier? And I'm not sure if it will work on the trickle-in basis. And I really want people thinking of like getting involved in this stuff, which I think you should do, because what else are you going to do? Just sit around? But I want people to understand, as you try to connect with your local left and find it's maybe a skeleton crew and there's very little infrastructure, you got to understand this is a consequence of there was never a big, leader leading people into these parties. And who am I? I'm a YouTube channel. We got 27,000 subscribers. I'm not that person. I can't go out and fill a stadium and be like, right now we're all going to go, register in this party and we're going to go, go do X, Y, Z. I don't really see that as my purpose right now. That's why I've been telling people for a long time to get involved with your local left. And I've been steering people more toward big tent than really specific stuff. I don't think any of the Marxist stuff is particularly good to the level that I would endorse it. And in fact, I will edit in here an old clip, I think it's from 2022, where I was explaining this more explicitly. I'll put it right here. Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is October 29, 2021. And earlier this week, I put up a video which was an audiobook and discussion titled History of the Modern Black Liberation Movement and the Black Workers' Congress Summed Up from 1974 by the Black Workers' Congress. That was a really interesting hour-long video about working in organizations and focusing on this particular organization, the Black Workers' Congress, and related other organizations. I highly encourage you to go check that out. But at the end of the video, after reading through the whole thing and thinking about it, it got my brain going in terms of just thinking about experiences in organizations. And basically, I talked for about 10 minutes, giving some general thoughts about that. If you want the really short version, I I cannot recommend at this time just doing this channel, which is not tied to an organization, and striving for Marxist unity as much as that's possible, and just trying to focus on baseline, broad-based education. I can't recommend any specific Marxist group, but I would recommend, particularly for people with less experience in organizations, join one of the more mass membership groups like DSA or the Green Party. You don't have to get married for life to it, but spending a year or two in that, you can meet people, and honestly, you probably meet a surprising amount of Marxists in there, although those organizations do have their right wings, which are more reformist and whatever. Anyway, what I'm going to do here is just chop out that last 10 minutes and just put it here into its own video so that it's not quite as buried. Let me know what you think in the comments. Organizations are tough. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, and I commend anybody who is sincerely trying to build a socialist organization. It's not easy work, particularly in the U.S. So, my hat's off. I also make a point of frequently, at the end of every video now, recommending to people that, if you have that project you've been thinking about starting, go ahead and do it, try to give some encouragement on that. I also recommend that if there's a good organization in your area, to join it, because consciousness does get sharpened by actively participating in movements and getting out there in the world and doing things. And, no organization is perfect, but as is quoted here from Mao, Marxism develops in the struggle against bourgeois and petty bourgeois ideology. And it is only through struggle that it can develop. That's really key. And I think that in the US in particular, where I am and where the majority of the audience is for this channel at the present moment, you're going to encounter that in probably any organization that you join. In fact, somebody asked me recently, what are the good organizations that I would recommend? And at this time, I can't make any specific recommendations. What my response to that is, that's something everybody needs to figure out for themselves, for like where you see your interests best represented, for the organization that speaks to you the most, where you feel you're going to be most effective, or where you can take the next step in developing your consciousness. That's something you got to figure out, because all of the groups, I've heard bad things about every single organization that there is. So I don't know that there is one that is free of that. And what I don't want to do is start steering people into some particular organization, which then turns out to have some massive problem, especially when I'm not involved with it personally myself. I don't think anybody particularly gains from doing that. So if you're considering a smaller group, something specifically communist, do your research on it. Try to talk to people from that organization, search for stories online and anecdotes. Understand not everything online is true or accurate. Some of it may be smears or things like that. But if you see a consistent pattern, it may be worth noting that, maybe asking the organization how they respond to it. But basically, do try to do some research before you join something, particularly something smaller. And the one recommendation that I really would make, which I feel like, while it might not be the fast track to, being involved in the most sort of elite, cutting edge vanguard group, is particularly if you do not have experience with real life political organization or political party membership, so that's something you're totally new to, I would recommend joining more of a mass membership, less fringe group, such as the DSA or the Green Party. Because, number one, those organizations can always use more Marxists in there, pushing for more actually socialist positions. We see in the case of the Green Party, I think that Howie Hawkins did a decent job introducing some more actually socialist positions. The Green Party has sort of been all over the place. There are more right-leaning, green capitalists like petty bourgeois things going on and hippie capitalism, there are also some actual socialists in the Green Party. And like I said, I think that they can always use more. Whether, you're in that party for a long time or not, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, whatever. It will give you some experience with group membership and group decision making and group accountability and group project administration and execution. And it will just get you used to that type of work. It might be a good experience, it might be a bad experience, but the idea is getting that entry level experience with political organizing and, just group activity in a place where you're least likely to get totally burned out and totally, just burned, period. There's so many stories of people joining organizations, and if the organization is dysfunctional, they wind up taking on too much, or there's some kind of huge, major war going on within the party, and people are getting accused of all kinds of stuff which has nothing to do with political work, and those things can get really escalated and really crazy. Having it, again, those entry-level experiences in an organization which are more mass membership in nature, maybe a bit safer for you. So, and like I said, I talked about the Green Party, let's talk about DSA a little bit. So DSA has some major problems. Anybody joining DSA, put it on your agenda, tell them S4A sent you. No, don't. Put it on your agenda to oppose the endorsing of any Democratic candidates. As I always say, the fundamental task of the U.S. left right now is to break completely with the Democratic Party and with all capitalist parties. Republican, Libertarian, obviously, but definitely the Democratic Party. DSA has not done this. That said, they do some very useful local organizing. Could there be better alternatives organized? Undoubtedly, yes. Organization-wise, could there be better alternatives organized? Yes. But getting into an organization like that, particularly if you don't know anybody in your area who has socialist politics, you can meet some people, and maybe, you get into that organization, and 6 months or a year in, you wind up being a key voice in, leading a Marxist faction towards taking more of an actually socialist position on whatever issue happens to come up within your branch. And people notice that, you influence them, and maybe there's even a split in the organization, and you and a group of 5 or 6 other people wind up frustrated with the limitations of that organization, splitting off and forming a new project which from the ground up is organized in a fundamentally better way, that doesn't make some of those other mistakes or doesn't have some of those other contradictions. And your project then over the next 5 years goes on to cover a lot more ground, make a lot more progress, etc. But you might not have met the people that you would be partnering with without getting involved in the first place. So I get that DSA and the Greens are not, even explicitly Marxist parties. So, why would a Marxist channel encourage particularly less experienced people to join them? Well, again, the basics of getting experience, which is just invaluable. It's going to help you in any effort that you try to do later on in terms of, mass work or anything. It's going to be helpful. And, while you're in there gaining that experience, take that opportunity to push them further left. Whether or not it sticks, whatever. Like DSA, for example, has major issues with the right wing of DSA not being internationalist and not really being anti-imperialist. Okay, so you can be in the left wing of DSA. You can be in the Marxist wing of DSA, which, actually hammers on the right-wing elements within DSA. Great. Everyone comes away better off for that having happened. So I guess that's my general advice with regard to organizations is try to avoid really tiny niche things unless you're very experienced or it's just really, really calling to you. That way, again, it's a little bit safer. Especially in small orgs, people can get really a lot of work and responsibility dumped on them that they're not necessarily ready for, or that the organization can't support them in doing. And it just results in sometimes massive personal crisis for people that they have to spend years recovering from. You want to avoid that. And it really is a very real hazard. Don't underestimate that. Or if you're not up for a political party, you might consider joining something more general, like a mutual aid network, which is not there as, it's not taking upon itself the task of like orchestrating the revolution. You're just organized around some specific purpose. And that to me is more the strength of a DSA, less for guiding political philosophy, which I think any Marxist entering DSA would really probably be opposed to many of their positions and would have to hammer on them from the left. But getting involved with it for some of the more practical work that they're doing, whether that's helping to organize a tenants union or supporting a minimum wage increase or something to that effect, that can be helpful. Like I said, you can network with people, meet people you wouldn't have met otherwise, and maybe after collecting phone numbers and email addresses and whatever other connections you're making through social media, maybe you step back for a while, and then it hits you, the idea that you think your area really needs, that would be a great next step forward. Then you have people to contact. So there are benefits to getting involved, and you just want to be careful where you do it. That's, I think, all I'm going to say about it at this time. If people have experiences that they want to share, good, bad, and neutral, with organizations, and just other tips that you think I should be relating to people in these videos regarding getting involved with organizations, let me know, and let's have a discussion. We'll continue that in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Okay, so that was my explanation. I've been saying this for literally years, but that's the thing, is like, go into these organizations, get involved in your local struggle. The problem is when people trickle in, I don't know if the trickle in can keep pace with the turnover and the burnout, which inevitably happens in these small organizations. People have bad experiences for one reason or another. You get a lot of people who are very angry about social issues. There tends to be a lot of conflict in these organizations, which isn't constructive criticism. And there can just be a lot of problems. And so it stays at this low level of activity over a long period of time. That's something that we need, that quantum leap. Bernie could have done that. He didn't do it. I don't know where the quantum leap is. I think that we saw the beginnings of something, maybe, with the anti-genocide movement still going on. But it has to get organized. And so, like I said, I've been trying to understand for a while, why is it not happening? And yeah, I think people have been too comfortable. That has changed somewhat since 2008. I think it's going to keep changing. And I do think there's going to be more and more demand, more and more interest in getting organized. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing. We're talking on this channel largely to the vanguard and to the advanced masses, communist and communist curious people, trying to help out with the recommended reading lists, and helping people in their studies, so that when they do go and try to do a left project in their community, and this is on the way up to building something more national. I don't think you can just decree that into existence, though, out of the low level of struggle we have now. It's got to be a mass movement, and you get your vanguard out of that. But obviously, we need people to start training now to be the vanguard that we will need maybe sooner than we think. I'm trying to do that. That's what all the audiobooks are about, obviously. And I'm not a long-time expert on this by any means. However, having done this channel for almost 5 years now, I have been reading a lot. I'm no longer in the position that a lot of the viewers are in. So when I started doing this channel, I was behind a lot of the more established communist listeners, and I had to catch up. And I took a lot of shit at face value. I was like pro-China for the first few years. I kind of took that more at face value. After I did more reading, I realized why it wasn't correct. And I started realizing revisionism was a massive problem. And we started talking about that more in the more recent 3 years. But now I'm at a point where I am actually ahead in my reading of, like, I would say the majority of people coming to the channel. And so I'm trying to orient the channel now, like, along those lines. This is no longer just some guy reading with an audience of 100 or 500 people, a bunch of Marxist stuff, and then ranting. You know what I mean? We've gone beyond just I'm some guy that's been involved in the left, wondering where the hell everybody else is, and trying to get something going to there is something going. And it's not just this channel. There's an overall across the board effort of people like you and like me that see the need, see capitalism's coming down. This is not going to last forever, and we have to start preparing. That's what this is all about, and I'm getting more and more focused on that, as time goes on. But as time goes on, we gotta keep pulling people out of the Democratic Party. It's like one of the fundamental tasks of the U.S. left, along with rebuilding the labor movement, getting the labor endorsements out of the Democratic Party, etc. I still think we're making baby steps along that road. And but just for people who have read a lot of Marx and Lenin, and you're advanced in your Marxist-Leninist studies, understand until the masses are really in play in a serious way, and we have helped them out of their misplaced hopes, their false hopes in liberalism, their false hopes in the Democratic Party, that that is in any way a way out of the situation. Once they've done the hard work of confronting all that's a lie, and they've done the work of making themselves emotionally and personally ready to take an alternative course of action, we can start doing something from there. But that's like the beginning. I think that we're still working on that, and using this election kind of as I see a ton of it on social media. I see a ton of the liberal wailing and gnashing of teeth because they think A, capitalism is going to go on forever, and B, that the elections are the only way to do anything, and they're losing their minds over Trump, just like they did in 2016, 2017. Look, we have to press on here. Things are going to get a lot more serious, and we have to prepare, and being attached to the Democratic Party is not going to help you in any way. That's how the capitalists hold us back, and we have to move on. All right. I think I have said enough for now. Let's get into the chat, and we will... first of all, let me just thank the patrons real quick. This is a week or two out of date, so there's some people who've signed up who are not thanked. If you appreciate what we're doing here, patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. You can kick in some funds. It's greatly appreciated. I would make content even if nobody supported, but this allows me, those contributions allow me to spend much, much, much more time on it than I would be able to do otherwise. And that support has gone up a lot in the last couple of years. And I'm really making this channel a large focus of my efforts and attention. So you're helping to make that possible. If you like this channel, thank a patron or buy me a coffee supporter and consider becoming one yourself. That's the only way that we get funded, is because you all out in the audience decided to give us money. We don't run ads. We don't do sponsorships. It's a non-commercial channel. It is viewer supported. So if you like it, please do. Even if it's $2 or $5, everything is encouraging. It's also materially helpful. And I really appreciate the people who do support. This is not easy work, especially when you come down with any kind of, no matter how well-researched or well-founded, you come out with an opinion, people attack you. It's not going to change what I'm doing. I do try to learn from the comments to see where people are at and so on. We're guided by the readings. We're anchored in that. And we're trying to stay current with what all is going on in the broader left. This funding helps to continue to make that a focus. It involves lots of research, lots of reading, lots of, reading social media, seeing what people are talking about and taking the pulse and, keeping up with all the things. Oh, did you see so-and-so said this? No, I didn't. Let me go take 5 or 10 minutes and read this link that, a viewer sent in, which is greatly appreciated. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to do this well. But we are trying to do that because I am deeply passionate. Like I said, I've been trying for a long time to figure out why is the U.S. left so underdeveloped and how do we develop it? And as capitalism continues to decay, what actions are needed to avoid worst case scenarios and hopefully get some better case scenarios. And that's what this is about. I'm not like a philosophy brain or anything like that. This is very much rooted in the practical, guided by the theory. So that's what it's about. So thanks again to the patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters, past and present, because There's a lot of people who used to support. They gave a lot of money. They have moved on to something else, but it has all helped over time. So I appreciate it all, even if whatever disagreements I've had with people, I just hope people understand, this is difficult, and I really do try to engage in the absolute best faith discourse I can with people. Ultimately, I got to stay true to what I honestly think is true. And, we can have discussions and I'll try to comment on things. But I find a lot of the time people will misunderstand what I'm saying. That's maybe the most common thing. We try to work it out. We try to come to a mutual shared understanding. And it happens sometimes. A really recent example of that, actually, is on the JVP NPP stuff. People might remember a few live streams ago, we did some stuff about the Sri Lanka elections, and there is a revisionist Marxist-Leninist party which got elected there. And somebody was in the comments like, well, I understand that you're saying that the Green Party would be a step forward for the U.S., and why don't you see the Sri Lanka thing as similar, because they are doing mass work and things like that. Anyway, I wound up having a discussion with this commenter saying that my criticism of the Sri Lankan quote-unquote Marxist-Leninist party is not that they're doing mass work, and it's not that they're engaging in a united front type of situation. In that sense, they're actually doing it well, because in that NPP coalition, the JVP, the ostensibly Marxist-Leninist party, is in the political lead of that coalition. It's their candidate that won the presidency, and there are other groups in that United Front coalition, but the Marxists are in charge. That's really what you want. The problem is not that. The problem is they are revisionist. When you ask them what is socialism, they'll tell you that the United States was doing market socialism in the 20th century, and they're using China as their model now. And so the criticism is actually more in line with my criticism of PSL, that what they're saying is socialism when asked, what do you consider to be socialism? They're giving an answer that is not socialism, that is revisionist. So that's actually the criticism there. And actually, we came to an understanding. This person kind of started out kind of snarky, and I think they're actually from that area. And we, reached an understanding. So it is possible. And then there's other people you just get into an argument with, and they just won't listen. And, I, of course, have finite time to engage in that. But speaking of engaging in that, let's go to the chat. All right, what's going on in the chat? 100 viewers. Sorry to interject, but the working class, as in proletarians, make up the vast majority of all workers in the U.S. Proletarians are propertyless wage workers, and those with higher wages and or greater benefits may develop a false petty bourgeois consciousness. It doesn't necessarily even take that much, because that's what TV is trying to do, and all the other bourgeois messaging is trying to instill false consciousness. But anyway, and it can also come from just, getting a raise or whatever. But they're still objectively, in terms of their class position, propertyless wage workers. They don't own capital, they don't make a living off of capital, etc. It doesn't matter where their head is at, it matters what role they play in production. So yes, we actually had a discussion on Twitter about this recently, where I think somebody was legitimately confused about this. People are proletarian, even if they have petty bourgeois consciousness, and even if they live in an imperialist country where there are improved living conditions due to super profits. Although again, and really increasingly, there is really severe inequality growing, where workers have fewer and fewer opportunities to really engage with that wealth. But there was somebody thinking that proletarians in imperialist countries aren't proletarians anymore, and that's not the case. They may develop a labor aristocracy. They may become petty bourgeois in their thinking. They may become chauvinist and anti-internationalist. But they are still, in terms of their actual class position, objectively proletarian. They just have developed false consciousness. They have a class ideology which does not match their class position. There are definitely some proletarians who get the spoils of empire, people working in HR or finance, etc., but I'm not convinced that the average American who more or less lives hand to mouth is really getting those spoils. Yeah, that's what I was saying about the inequality. Most people really don't. Most Americans seem to be one major medical emergency away from bankruptcy, and we can see that from polls that two-thirds of people say they cannot survive a $500 to $1,000 emergency. That is that is subsistence, that is living hand to mouth. Now they may have some nice electronic devices and things like that, but fundamentally they are like two steps from being homeless, if that. Just point out again, the median rent right now is $2,000 a month in the United States. It's a crisis, and that's being driven by Airbnb. It's being driven by all kinds of also mom and pop investors just buying up housing stock, and also the median price of a house is like $430,000. You have to be making over $100,000 a year, like well over $100,000 a year, to afford that. So to afford the median house, like 50th percentile, you have to be at like the 90th percentile in terms of income. So we have deep inequality and a growing crisis that, again, is likely to erupt in another 2008. Now, I understand it's not the same as like living in a village in Pakistan, obviously, but it's not always as great as people think with the kind of instability that people do experience. The insecurity. It's very easy to become homeless in the United States. And once you fall there, I mean, it's a pretty fast track to the bottom, and your life expectancy goes way down, and it's horrible. And this is amid incredible wealth, unlike the world has ever known previously. The precarious economic position doesn't really give the impression of being a labor aristocrat in a first world country. And I think that you find this increasingly with younger people, like under the age of 50 in particular. People are just not experiencing the same level of security that people had even 20 or 30 years ago. And that's still another major disconnect. Like, we just had the election, older voters not understanding what's going on, where people, 40 and under in particular, are like experiencing incredible insecurity, cannot get ahead no matter what we do. So there's a definite time factor. It's not like just static over time. S4A, my goal for 2025 is organizing enough to get dock workers' unions on our side to blockade all shipments of weapons to Israel. I think that should be the standard for most Marxist groups. I mean, it's a great goal. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of discussions. There's a lot of consciousness raising that needs to be done there. Obviously, it's not just an order that can be imposed from without. That's something that has to come from an understanding within the rank and file and the leadership of those unions. The union brass is probably going to resist it, but you may be able to get wildcat strikes from the rank and file defying the union leadership. But don't underestimate how much of a relationship and an understanding and an internationalist perspective needs to be built before you're going to see the majority of the rank and file going for something like that. I mean, it's a great goal, necessary, because ultimately, workers could shut down all the militarism. I mean, that's really what we're shooting for here as you build up to a revolutionary moment, is that workers are class conscious, organized, we know our power, we know our goals, and we are organized well enough and skillful enough with that to pull it off. But there's like so much work that needs to go into that. And that's where, again, getting in touch with your local left is kind of the beginning. You're talking to other fairly like-minded people there. Going in and salting workplaces and doing other kind of union, type working class espionage, so to speak. It's a huge process. And there are influence campaigns that can be waged through social media. We need to use every means at our disposal to build this kind of a working class culture that is internationalist, that is ultimately socialist. What's your opinion on liberals using Marx's congratulatory to Lincoln as an excuse to vote for Kamala? I haven't seen that, actually. I have read Marx's congratulatory letter to Lincoln. We are not... I mean, opportunists will use all kinds of excuses for their opportunism. I don't think that's a particularly good one because we're not in a situation anything like the 1860s right now. So, I think it's just kind of a reflection of how sad, how much of a reach the opportunists have to engage in or attempt in order to try to justify their opportunism. I mean, it's like we did a video back in 2020 when Vosh read a list of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao quotes in support of Joe Biden. And it was the most tortured, out of context, lack of understanding thing you've ever heard. We did like a 3-hour video on it. And they always do this, to some extent. Fun fact, Oklahoma has basically outlawed third-party voting. No write-ins, no blank ballot protest votes. They make you fill in everything. And expect more of this. So our organizing cannot rely on the elections. And even what I've been saying for years with that, is, even if you're in a party that runs candidates, 90 to 95% of your efforts should be on non-electoral organizing. There should be year-round campaigns. And then, when there's an election, use it to call out, to point a finger at the insufficiencies of liberal democracy to deliver for the working class. But again, that's like 5 to 10% of your effort. It's just one small component of what you're doing. But increasingly that'll be the case where the elections are just meaningless or you're barred entirely from participating in them. And that means if you actually care about the outcome here, we have to find other ways to cause change. Not that the elections really do cause change in the first place. People can, and this is something I used to say constantly, is there is a certain group of people that think all this can be fixed. Well, really the SOCDEM gang. I used to do a lot of hanging with the SOCDEM gang. Criticisms, people like David Dole, The Rational National, Humanist Report, Kyle Kulinski, TYT, all these people, where it's just like elect better Democrats and everything will be fine. No, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. So that doesn't actually cause change. And as we've been saying, more directly recently, supporting Democrats means supporting Republicans, because the Democrats keep saying we need a strong Republican Party. They're never going to really effectively stand up to the right wing and to Republicans. They're not going to do that. They're owned by the same people. Their job is to block the left more than it is to crush the right. Otherwise, if the Democrats really cared about protecting democracy and everything else, they would have internal democracy. They would go for ranked choice voting. They would be pushing for proportional representation in the state governments and maybe the national government. They would abolish the Senate. They would abolish the Electoral College, or they'd be leading efforts to do this. The list goes on. They would be engaging in and supporting pro-democracy reforms that would make the whole political system more democratic. It's 2024. They don't do any of this stuff, and in fact, quite the opposite. But more than that, they would be aligning with left parties. They'd be doing a popular front against fascism. They won't do it because that's not their job. Their job is not to stop the right. Their job is to stop the left. The sooner people realize that, the sooner you will realize no change comes from the Democratic Party. Change comes in spite of the Democratic Party, not because of it. Oklahoma was also the state that tried to put Trump Bibles in every classroom. Yeah, I'm sure Trump reads the Bible every night. The other issue is, like in the UK, liberals flocking to the SOCDEM Green Party because it's the new hotness and trying to pull it rightward. Yeah, absolutely. That's why we start now. Well, first of all, that's why we call it a struggle, right? We do also have to understand we're working with an anti-communist population, and there's a lot of work that has to be done. There's a lot of consciousness raising that has to be done. And some of that's only going to come after a lot of struggle and people finally, break through the denial. And they're like, all right, you're right. The liberals really are just disguised fascists. People reach that realization at different points. You and I reached it already. That's why we're here having this discussion. Other people, it's going to take 10 or 20 years for them to realize that. Some will never realize it. Okay. So that's when you get involved in these bigger tent organizations, which I think is it's going to be part of the process of rebuilding a U.S. left. is you got to go in prepared to deal with anti-communist, people, including anarchists, by the way. And you've got to go in prepared for that. You got to, know when you're beaten and, go along with something that might not be the best. You got to know when to really push forward. You got to know, this is playing politics and building political power overall. So, yeah, obviously there will be, as that thing grows, you're going to get a lot of people in there. The mass party also trying to join like more of a vanguard that couldn't give less of a shit or actually anti-communist. I mean, we already see like whatever's going on with the ACP. That is not Marxist in any way, shape, or form, but they're holding themselves out that way. They're trying to shitcoat communism. They're trying to shitcoat Marxism. That's going to happen. You have to expect it. It's why we call it a struggle. And this is why you have to study to know what you're talking about so you don't get swept away and you can identify it and resist it. It is a struggle. Struggle for correct ideas. The CPUSA is reeling from this election. Yeah, I haven't talked to any CPUSA contacts about how they're doing, but it doesn't look good. I definitely agree that in this moment, and that's what we're talking about, is the moment we are working with right now, a growing mass left party would be a huge improvement. And again, the point there being, people turned out by the stadium full to support Bernie Sanders, and they really believed in it. The people who I knew who were doing like the Bernie stuff in the most committed way, I knew people who went to the DNC as delegates. I mean, they poured their heart into it, and they were shattered when he betrayed them. All those people, had they just gotten into the correct party, and boom, the Green Party has suddenly 5 or 10 million people who are in the correct party finally, and they're not trying to work within a party that just can't do it. I mean, what we were saying at the time, and Jill Stein said in that clip that I was talking about earlier, is you can't build a revolutionary movement in a counter-revolutionary party. It just doesn't work like that. But yeah, that would have been a huge improvement, yet 8 years later, it still hasn't happened. So that's, to me, it's standing there going, I want to see this happen. Can anything be done to make it happen? Why hasn't it happened? What would have to happen for it to happen? Is this feasible? Because I'm pretty much stuck in the United States. I've thought about going other places. It hasn't panned out. I feel like I'm pretty much stuck here. And, it's like you got to try to do what you try to do. For no other reason, for other people like you suffering from this and trying to figure it out. We do the study groups and we build what political power we can. We will do what we can. But it is hard. And yeah, that would have been a huge step up. Just at least getting people out of the Dems and into the right party. Still hasn't happened yet. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what it'll take to, do that Bernie moment outside the Dems and to get that mass exodus. I don't know. The genocide in Gaza is a terrible cost, and that didn't even work. We went from healthcare please to stop the genocide. We haven't gotten either because they just don't fucking care, and we don't have the political power to shut it down. I mean, we theoretically do, but it's not organized, and that's what's got to be done. So it's an issue of what are the practical steps that are going to get us from here to there, working with the population we have. And that doesn't mean just pandering to Trump people, because that, no matter what you do, that's not going to get you anywhere. I don't have Instagram, but I saw a comrade promoting an Instagram. I don't have Instagram either, for @IsolatePSL, if anyone wants to check that out. Now, I'm way up in the chat right now, but what is that? I've never heard of that. Can you explain what that is? Trumpist fascism is coming to Canada within months, won't be long. I keep seeing people saying that. I've been following the Canadian situation. I know you got that Pierre guy and the whole Wexit movement, and you had the Flu Trucks clan. We did videos on that. The Canadian, quote, trucker protest. So I know you got your reactionaries up there, too. And all this stuff is fucking astroturfed by the same fucking billionaires anyway. There was something like that in Brazil, too, in support of Bolsonaro. I mean, it's money. It's a global right-wing convergence. And then liberalism is dying. It's insufficient to combat it, to say the least. I mean, it's really running cover for it. But people who are trying to do bourgeois anti-fascism, it's insufficient. It's not going to work. You want to get what capitalists you can, obviously, to defect but they're vacillating. They're not reliable. The overwhelming core of your anti-fascist movement has to be proletarian. There's really no other way. The vacillating petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie, they're not really staunch anti-fascists, and you can see that throughout history. A lot of petty bourgeoisie gets sucked into fascism, but then you'll get some elements within the capitalist class that are like, well, wait, we need to save capitalism, but do we really need to put people into ovens? They'll get some qualms about how the system is trying to prevent revolution. And so you get to some extent, bourgeois anti-fascism, but it's going to be the weakest layer of your overall anti-fascist coalition. And you absolutely, if you engage in a popular front or whatever class collaborationist situation, I mean, ideally you want more of a united front between communist and non-communist proletarian elements. But to the extent you're bringing in any non-proletarian elements, strict control and never take your eye off a revolution, because I think that's arguably a lot of what happened in the popular fronts of Western Europe in World War II. I was taken off of revolution. It became too conciliatory toward the quote-unquote anti-fascist bourgeoisie. But that is when we discuss Dimitrov in more detail some other time. Scrolling down, and I'm having to skip a bunch of comments. I'm glad to see so many people in the chat, though. For people who aren't here usually, I try to read through like almost all the comments just chronologically, but today, just due to time, and I went on a long opening monologue, can't read every single one out. PSL has been tainted for me. My more advanced friends constantly glaze it and China with little to no critical thought, and whenever I object in any way, it's more or less ignored. Yeah, I've seen that too, where like the line on PSL is, well, imperialism is concentrated or centered in the US and Europe, and we can like more or less turn a blind eye to the fact that BRICS, being a coalition of emerging capitalist economies, is somehow not going to act in the same way that emerging monopoly capitalist powers have acted in the past, and a lot of this centers around it's lesser evilism in an inter-imperialist conflict. The whole quote-unquote socialism with Chinese characteristics is further aiding in that lesser evilist revisionism. Revisionism, for people who don't know, in a Marxist sense, is when you start to replace or revise revolutionary proletarian ideas with bourgeois ideas. So we say that reformism or social democracy is when bourgeois ideas enter the general workers' movement. You get social democratic type formations, and revisionism is when the bourgeois ideas enter the communist vanguard. They never mention just how bad the kulaks were. When we were talking about the NEP earlier, I mean, the NEP was over in 6 years. Why? Lenin thought it would go on for a lot longer than that. They didn't realize how counter-revolutionary the capitalists that they were tolerating under communist leadership actually turned out to be. And they're like, look, we're going to lose this entire thing if we don't shut down the NEP. And so that's what they did. There were complications that came along with that, but it was the least bad option anybody could come up with, and they were correct in doing it. All the campists refused to read revolutionary defeatism. Yeah, campism is the term. So there used to be a socialist camp. We have on the channel Stalin's Two Camps from 1919. Talking about the emergence of a socialist camp, the establishment of what would become the USSR, alongside the existing capitalist, imperialist camp. And the thing is that the socialist camp stopped existing decades ago. And so if you're still trying to do campism, it's really more in line with Dunga's Three Worlds theory. So after the death of Mao in the 70s in China, they attributed this to Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong never wrote any pieces about it. He maybe mentioned it in a speech one time, but like not well developed. It seemed more like a capitalist rotor thing. They came out with this class collaborationist three worlds theory. Now, it may have come from Mao. Mao was getting pretty bad in his old age, but especially under Deng Xiaoping, it's Dengism, when China started opening up, quote unquote, started doing capitalism in a major way and like trying to join the World Trade Organization and stuff like that, and generally stop funding socialist and national liberation movements for fear of offending their would-be investors in the imperial core. Big about face for China around that time of like 1980. Yeah, the socialist camp at this point, you've got a USSR which was already becoming very self-centered and what was criticized as being social imperialist. In other words, still socialist in name and to some extent overall, but starting to have a new bourgeoisie develop within it, which was then, it made its move, under Gorbachev in the 80s. Really wasn't long before the entire thing got undone and destroyed entirely. But anyway, socialist camp has been gone for decades now is the point. And people still trying to do this very sloppy campist type argument. It's completely outdated, but look at Three Worlds Theory. And I'll actually point you to a page right now. We're going to do more about this in the future, particularly when we cover the Sino, that means China, Albanian split, Sino-Albanian split, because China and Albania had previously, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, had more of an alliance against modern revisionism as like seen under Khrushchev. And then there was a split as China started to go off in its own direction and Albania started wondering, well, wait a minute, you were criticizing Soviet revisionism, now you're doing revisionism of your own. And then they had to go back and rethink a lot of what they had seen about China. And some, earlier suspicious things started to look a little more deadly in hindsight, actually. But anyway, there's a good summary page of this on Marxists.org. So there's a page in the Encyclopedia of Anti-Revisionism Online, U.S. Anti-Revisionism, the New Communist Movement, Crises, Splits, and More New Parties, 1977 to 1980. Again, that is the New Communist Movement, Crises, Splits, and More New Parties, 1977 to 1980. Anyway, that's a lot of where the campism is coming from, is out of China, Dengist, capitalist rotor, Three Worlds Theory. That's really still where it's coming from. Like, you look at a PSL or something like that, they're still doing Dengist Three Worlds Theory. And that's the source of the opportunism and the revisionism. And now the stakes are really high because, since 2022, it's looking more and more like a hot war, like World War III. And especially with the economic crisis coming in, that's like a recipe. Remember, the Great Depression helped to set the stage for World War II. So there's a lot of really concerning pieces lining up. And, that campism, the Three Worlds Theory, is, I think, is going to be pretty fatal for revolutionary movements. I just got off the phone with this guy who wants to form a Chester County chapter of DSA in Pennsylvania. Our first goal is finding out what we need people to do in the organization. Okay. I mean, I would also talk to other people who have formed DSA chapters. Ask them about the process, what worked for them and what didn't work for them. Learn from them. Ask DSA, can you put us in touch with other people, other chapters, and, talk to them, interview them, and get their advice. That's going to save you a lot of time. They can probably give you resources, too. This whole shit about Russia being, quote, anti-imperialist makes me cringe, referring to your comments. Yeah, that's what we were just talking about with the three worlds and this whole BRICS, lesser of two imperialist evils, the lesser of two imperialist blocks kind of thing. People who've fallen for the Russia anti-imperialism stuff, I feel like a lot of these people are just literally out of a troll farm. You cannot reason with them whatsoever. They have terrible arguments. To the extent that these are real people, they have very, very low critical thinking skills. A lot of conversations I've tried to have about that have gone absolutely nowhere. And I've touted many times, Marxist Paul, who I think is running Marxism Today now, has a video on campism. No, Russia is not anti-imperialist. Please watch that. It is imperialist in the Marxist-Leninist sense. And what we know about imperialist countries is they try to compete for redivision of the world to get more profits out of the world imperialist system. That's exactly what Russia is trying to do, what BRICS in general is trying to do. yes, they're trying to develop. Like that's the face that's always put on it, is like, oh, they're trying to develop. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can develop as a capitalist economy or develop as a socialist economy. When you're still doing capitalism, it's going to be predatory and unequal. When you're doing socialism, it's not. So, I mean, for starters. But yeah, just imperialist countries act in particular ways. Now, as socialists, we know that development is key. But at a certain point, you can have a proletarian revolution and continue the development along socialist lines. That's not what BRICS wants at all. They do not want proletarian revolutions. They are run by capitalists who want to keep doing capitalism. They want to get rich. That's what they want. That's what capitalists want. Sorry to break it to you. You know, if you're calling yourself a Marxist, you don't even understand that. I don't know what to say. If you want to look at real-world competition of G7 versus BRICS, look at Bangladesh. China and India competed. The U.S. used the grievances of the people and used it against Hasina. Thank you. We will see where will Bangladesh position itself. Yeah. Thank you for the audiobooks. Thank you, Bruno, for taking the time to study. People thank me many times for the audiobooks, and I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad that you, like me, want to know this stuff and are taking the time to study. I really appreciate it. So thank you right back. Thoughts on Bibi firing his one defense minister in protests in Israel? Not yet. I'll hold back opinions on that. The only thing I will say is a lot of... If you remember what was happening before the big assault on Gaza, there were massive protests in Israel against the judicial reform. That has all quieted down in the name of national unity. So very, very convenient for Netanyahu. There's also a lot of discussion about Israel's economy, that it is not doing well, that it is being downgraded, etc. So there are already some repercussions for Israel of these actions. Unfortunately, you know, it's not coming fast enough in any way, shape, or form for a lot of the people of Gaza. It's a desperate situation and a genocide. The world needs to step up, and very, very few people, I mean, aside from like the Houthis, very few people have done fucking anything so far. And Iran also did those strikes on Israel. But this has been like really minimal so far. And Israel is getting away with a lot of it. They may suffer repercussions after the fact, but you cannot let a people get wiped out just comfort yourself with the fact that, oh, Israel will have repercussions later. It's not enough. They have to be stopped. Give them the repercussions too, but stop them. Can't believe massive left tubers don't advocate for a third party and instead tell people DNC or bust. I'll say it again. We talked about it for like over an hour in the beginning. It's not about winning elections. It's about getting people out of the closed circuit death cult of the Democratic Party, where independent thought and ideological struggle cannot occur. We have a gigantic struggle against capitalism looming in the future as capitalism goes into steeper and steeper decay. And that's not going to be an electoral struggle in the end. And we need to pull people out of the whole liberal brainwashing farm of, we just, vote harder and all this stuff. That's not cutting it. You can already see it's not cutting it. And if you're serious about a future, we need to organize outside that party. And number one is just escaping it, getting dem exit, get out of that whole, the circulation of those ideas that keep you trapped and wedded to bourgeois anxieties as they face their own imminent destruction as a class, as capitalism leads the world into climate crisis, biosphere collapse. They know on some level that the end is coming for their class. And so if you get into their politics, you're going to get that secondhand in all kinds of ways. You're not going to be able to strategize clearly about what needs to come next. So step one is getting out of there and reorienting yourself to proletarian ideology. That is key. Also, the Democratic Party is hideously chauvinist and militarist, anti-internationalist. So, and obviously, we're talking about the Democratic Party. You don't find a lot of advanced masses in the Republican Party. Obviously, the same goes double for them, except you're not going to find a lot of advanced masses in the Republican Party in the first place. So that's why we don't focus on that as much. But to the extent that there are people who could be really good socialists and communists, or even just, good labor leaders in the Democratic Party, their talents are wasted and they're being co-opted in service of a class leading the planet towards extinction. And they know it. They know that this isn't going to last forever. I mean, they might deny it. They might put out media showing, quote, futuristic stuff where you have capitalism in the year 2100. Yeah, it's not going to make it that far. It's just not. All of that is a lie. So it's about step one, getting out of that entire mental atmosphere and getting into somewhere where you're not being barraged with bourgeois propaganda. You are in the general society barraged by bourgeois propaganda. They spend billions on it a week. And there's a reason, by the way. They would rather hang on to those billions a week. There's a reason they spend billions on it a week. Because if they didn't, they're afraid that they would lose mental control over you. When I call it a death cult, I really, really mean it. So just getting out of there, first of all, and then not being around people constantly, in your face, trying to hook you back into it. I get a lot of comments of people who is like, well, can't we just vote for Democrats now and then fight them later? And it's just like, you're not there yet. It's not about how you voted in this election. In the sense of like, did you not vote? Did you vote Green? Did you vote for PSL? Is there a real big difference between whether you voted for PSL or Green or whatever? No. All that is evidence of a deeper understanding that you had to bail out of the Democrat-Republican overall system. That's the important thing. That's the important thing. What we do from there within the left, struggling for correct ideas and organizations and things like that, that is important. But like, number one, it's about developing the understanding and the awareness. You got to get out of it. So yeah, I would not listen to anybody that is still pushing the Democratic Party as viable. I think it's the fundamental, primary, like foundational step that people need to get out of that party in order to have baseline efficacy at anything and to start unbrainwashing themselves from the entire package of Democratic Party beliefs. The Howie Hawkins moment where he offered the nomination to Bernie in 2020, Howie Hawkins having been the Green Party candidate for president then and a co-founder of the party, was so close to being the right timeline. Except Bernie won't do it. He won't do it. Bernie will not step outside. He will not jeopardize the Democratic Party's chances. There's that clip of Bernie where he's like, I don't want to be blamed for Trump getting elected. Grow a fucking spine, you fucking asshole. That guy he picked up the U.S. left, organized all these rallies, and then dropped those tens of millions of people who pinned their hopes on him on their heads. Did so much damage to the left, we still haven't recovered. But those people who are not so damaged that they'll never trust anyone again after that, please get out of the Democratic Party and get organized wherever you feel most comfortable right now. And, to some extent, we can figure out the rest later. I will say again, though, about the vanguards, the reason that I was saying I'm more comfortable with people joining the Greens, first of all, we do not have a ton of communists in the population to begin with. And I would rather people not start learning revisionist communism from PSL. I'd rather that they start where they are, which is more like the Green Party platform, which you can read at gp.org. If that's where people are most comfortable, and I think that is where most people would be most comfortable, then fucking do it. Do it. Do it. Get in there and organize. And you're going to find comrades, and you're going to engage in local campaigns, and you're going to raise your minimum wage. You are going to decriminalize cannabis. You are going to do all the things that have swept the country in a lot of ballot initiatives. Maybe you get protections for renters, some kind of rent control, which some cities are starting to do. You change some of the labor laws in your state, and so on. But we start building a movement and a network of people who know each other and trust each other and fight alongside each other and build the class consciousness and the confidence that we're going to need in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to need it because things are going to get real hairy. Real hairy. Anyway, now the momentum that was in Medicare for All will be totally stagnant. Nobody even mentions it anymore. It's key. And it's not like people don't need healthcare anymore. Definitely do. But yeah, you got to use the moments that come up. And that was why, the Bernie moment, that was like once or twice in a century that you could have actually had a good mass entry jumping off point for like starting, getting the Green Party the membership it needs, which I do think would have been a big step forward. But like I was saying, I'm more comfortable with people kind of getting into that where it's not ideologically stringent or at least specifically Marxist than joining a revisionist. What I've seen a lot of, in other words, is people who become interested in Marxism and then they join the CPUSA as baby Marxists. So they haven't really done much background study. And then they get in there and they get like CPUSA or PSL teaching them what Marxism-Leninism is. And believe me, they're not good teachers. They're going to teach you a revisionist version of it. And the problem is the baby Marxists, they haven't read enough. It takes a few years to identify it as revisionist. And then, so you get all this turnover in those parties of people who get in there and they're good comrades and they've contributed to some like movement, but they're like, I can't stay in this party because it's revisionist. But it took them a couple of years to like realize that because they were baby Marxists. So, I'm not sure that that's the best thing. And I'm kind of hoping we can build up more anti-revisionist vanguard education. I think that that's another thing that obviously I'm working on with the channel, and I'm going to keep trying to develop that because we don't want CPUSA and PSL and other revisionists teaching people what Marxism is. We don't want the Trotskyists teaching people what Marxism is either, because they're going to teach them a fucked up version of it. But anyway, yeah, I'm with you. The Greens offered Bernie the ticket in 2016 and 2020. Bernie declined because he's a total coward and he betrayed the left massively. And I think that there's still a lot of people feeling that hurt. And I think that's a conversation that we need to bring some of those people back out. And, but people who are looking at joining the Greens or whatever in purely electoral terms, like, well, they can't win. Stop thinking about the elections. We need to get organized. Forget about winning for now. Okay, you're not going to win anything ever if you don't organize first. But, again, there's a lot of that thinking is just around the electoral system. It needs to be about organizing and getting people into a party that is not imperialist dominated. And then again, what comes out of that's up to the masses. People will figure out their projects. I mentioned some of the types of ballot initiatives that you see commonly in a lot of different states where the minimum wage or other kinds of things that are popular and progressive. That will continue, but you're not going to do it within the Democratic Party. Those parties will in fact fight you. And then after they get implemented, which happens with some of the ballot measures, the referendums that get put out there for people to vote on directly, is the people vote 60% in favor of whatever, raising the minimum wage, or some other protection for workers. And then it goes to like the state legislature and they drag their feet for years. So like, we got to build up the independent movement that can fight for us. And then again, eventually build up the confidence, experience, and organization to take it all down and build something in its place. It was like 10 things that the Democrats refused to do that Bernie and the Greens promise. Student debt forgiveness, $15 an hour national minimum, which is way out of date by now, which also varies like by location. I mean, there's certain cities where you can't really get by under 30, and then there's other places where the prevailing wage is like 14. So yeah. Medicare for all, jobs guarantee, green new infrastructure deal, bust the too big to fail banks, end the wars. Bernie today shows how much effort would be put into actually ending the war, and the war on drugs, prison reforms. There was actually a discussion happening on reforms and policies. Now it's just Trump will kill democracy, vote blue. Yeah, that's how the Democrats feed into the system. You see, the same thing happened with Bush and Cheney. There was like a big labor conference right before 9/11. Then that happened, and it's like everything just goes into survival mode, and it's the end of democracy and this and that. And when do people realize at some point you're being played? I mean, it's getting worse. That's not your imagination. But the Democrats are not part of the solution. They're part of the dog and pony show psyop that is roping you along just year after year after year, preventing a real fight. Again, that fight's only going to come from outside the Democratic Party. It's crazy because while vote blue people blame voters, actual leftists had the popular policy prescription that could have stopped Trump from ever being president in the first place. Yeah, and if you and I know that, they know that too. So you gotta ask yourself, why didn't they do it? There's a larger purpose here. It's about protecting the system. There's a lot that they don't share with the public. And like I said, there's another financial crash, I believe, around the corner. Maybe that the Democrats didn't want to be in office for that. Trump actually made comments to that effect. I'll see if I can edit in a visual of the article after the fact. But he was like, yeah, you don't want to be Herbert Hoover. He's like, I think that there's a depression coming, and which is not where I'm getting that. I'm not getting that from Trump. I just think that's actually an accurate statement by Trump. But yeah, there's a good chance of a major economic crash. And he's like, I don't want to be blamed for that. I don't want to be the president. I mean, he's running anyway, and it looks like he's winning. But yeah, we'll see. The Dems also refused to acknowledge they gutted every progressive policy. It looked throughout this thing like they weren't trying to win. Just running Joe Biden in the first place, he was barely coherent. I mean, it really looked like they were trying not to win. Who knows? Again, the thing is just get out of the party. That's issue number one. The more people we can get out of the party, organizing elsewhere, the sooner we can start coming to some sane consensus about how we move forward. And we need heavy Marxist involvement in that to keep it from going into really predictable and obvious failures. Do I have a preference between donations between Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee? I think I get to keep a little bit more through Buy Me a Coffee, but Patreon's features are a little bit easier to use. I guess I would say Buy Me a Coffee. Also, Patreon really screwed me over last year, which is why I started the Buy Me a Coffee in the first place. So yeah, I'd probably say Buy Me a Coffee. I think I get to keep a little bit more of it. Whatever's easiest for you, though, in the end. And also on Buy Me a Coffee, you can do a one-time donation through that, or you can have a recurring membership through that. I voted green, but I kind of was hoping Kamala would win because it would check some identity boxes, which could help people who think that all we need is a woman, person of color at the head of empire, and that would somehow be better. In other words, it would strip through some additional illusions of liberalism. I hear you. How do you still find hope these days, with how far behind the communist movement is around the globe, and how close the impending disaster of climate change is? Things seem bleak from where I'm standing, and it is difficult to find motivation to organize. If you don't think that trying to prevent the collapse of the biosphere is motivation to organize, I'm not sure what to say to you. You know, we could have a much better world that isn't dying. What else are you going to do? I mean, literally, I think of other things I could do, or just, I could not think about this so much. That's hugely irresponsible. So you have to. What else are you going to do? You know, I could start drinking myself to death, but that's not really how I want to spend my life. I also think it would be massively letting down future generations who have a chance at a future if we do what we need to do now. Kamala was advocating state rights for LGBT. She's basically a Confederate. Yeah, that was her whole thing. She was like refusing to answer the question about transgender laws, like anti-trans, basically prejudice against transgender people. And she's like, I will follow the law. And then just sat there like a robot. They're like, you don't have anything else to add? She's just like, whatever the law is, I will follow it. Wow. Way to be an advocate, you know? Again, it's like they were trying to lose. They may have been trying to lose. Not to be a brat, but the day after the revaluation, meant to say revolution, but revaluation definitely may be part of the process here. We'll be facing comrades who need to take over the Communist Party of China because they ain't pure socialism. It's not that they're not pure socialism. They're allowing capitalism to take over their country. Just thought after we win, maybe we should build up instead of critique. I think you're missing the point. Okay, here's the thing. If you're calling capitalism socialism, you can't build socialism. Okay? Most of the rest of it flows out of that. China is going to act in such a way that serves the capitalists who are conducting the economic activity in that country. They have gained political power. You know, that's only going to increase the richer that they get. There's this whole line that the proletariat of China is actually, holding them back from within that's not really what's happening. Arguably, they've never actually had a dictatorship of the proletariat. It's always been this highly modified thing that if you compare it to Stalin's definition of the dictatorship of the proletariat does not share power with other classes. Even in the alliance of the proletariat and the peasantry, it was the dictatorship of the proletariat, but with the support of the peasantry. It was actually an earlier stage that was the dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry. That was like the situation in 1905. What China has now is a dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry and the urban petty bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie. So according to Stalin, a dictatorship of the proletariat does not share power. That's what China does, though. And they're not even just sharing it with the peasantry. They're sharing it with the urban petty bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie. So it's Bonapartism. And, that's again, more akin to something even more like 1905 Russia rather than an actual dictatorship of the proletariat. It's also far behind the already problematic situation, the political formations of Eastern Europe, where you had like new democracy, people's democracy type stuff there. Even that was way more advanced than what was in China. And that's still the case in China, even as they get very developed. So if you're upholding that as socialism, what are you going to build in your country? This is the problem, is people proclaiming socialism and just doing capitalism again. That's not going to lead anybody anywhere, and we're going to wind up with the same fucking problems. Do you see? All our better Dems got worse. Well put. Yeah, it just doesn't work. The whole, we just need better Democrats. It does not work, has never worked. I'm in my 40s. My country has flip-flopped between two parties my whole life. Nothing ever got better. Right there with you. So about that person asking how do you stay motivated, this isn't me saying I'm not trying to get involved, but it's harder to do it with a passion or energetically. I don't really find value in being right if we end up dying. I mean, you can be wrong and inactive and end up dying, or you can be right and trying to fix things and end up dying. Being wrong and inactive is going to lower your odds of not dying, though. Struggling for correct ideas in organization, waging the struggle, increases your odds of not dying. Why don't you do that? If you value life over death and assume everybody else does too, that's your obvious course of action. If your complaint is it's risky or there's the possibility of failure, sorry, get over it. You're going to have to work that one out. I know that some people have this belief that everything's just going to work out fine and can't, really choke on the idea, really, really struggle against and are in denial of and just angry at the idea that everything might not be okay, but it might not. So get to work. This is where our responsibility comes into play, The thing about blue MAGA, quote, lesser evilism, quote, harm reduction, is that things got significantly worse under Biden after Trump. Yeah, but all the Democrats are playing see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. You and I see that, but this is another reason to get out of the party. People are just huffing those fumes and they're not seeing straight. Border camps, reproductive rights, Cop City, Palestinian genocide, etc. If their argument is things will be worse under Trump, well, things got even worse after him, so I'm very unconvinced by that argument. I think that that's actually a decent place to leave this, because what people need to understand is, was Trump worse than Obama? Yeah. But that's just one link in a chain. They're all worse than what came before them. It keeps getting worse. Because, again, this is a capitalism which is deteriorating and unraveling. That is the problem. They're just representatives of that system. Things will get worse, therefore we need to lower our standards. This is literally how they sound. Yeah. Get out of that party. Get out. Staying in that party is a death sentence. It's inaction. It's wrong ideas. It's embracing a dying class that leads that party. I've been getting into the comment sections of unions, especially those who called for a ceasefire and then endorsed Harris, with the slogan pro-genocide scabs to get some engagement and conversation going. Got some, but intend to continue as people search for answers post-election. There you go. That's called agitation. It's a little bit provocative, for sure, but I mean, desperate times. Use a variety of tactics, from conciliatory to provocative. See what works, and different things are going to work on different people. But we need to change that culture among the working class. All right, I'm going to save the comments for my own reading for later. I really appreciate everybody showing up. I just can't stay in the chat here anymore today, unfortunately. Scrolling down to the bottom. But, I really appreciate everybody showing up. Thanks to the 110 people who are here. We will stream again. We will continue the audiobooks. Where I'm at on the audiobooks, by the way, is we're going to do a couple of more like one-offs. And then the next thing is Capital, which is the second to last very long audiobook in the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide playlist. After that is Lenin's Imperialism. That caps off the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide playlist, which we started 5 years ago and probably will be done at about the 5th anniversary of the channel in February 2025. From there, we have other readings that we need to do from some of the other recommended reading lists. Morin Verhoja, taking anti-revisionism into the late 20th century and early 21st century. And so there's other, I would still say, foundational texts. We're also going to probably keep building off of that. So interesting things to come. And in between, we will keep agitating and commenting on current events and doing the stream. Keep the conversation going. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially if there is another 2008 type moment. There's going to be another Occupy type thing, and we gotta get it right one of these times. Just counting it as baby steps or just still in the formational early stages. At some point, it's like we need some results. So, yeah, I'm really encouraged by the growth of the number of people taking their studies more seriously, and I will be taking the channel in that direction to try to foster that as much as possible. So that's what we're going to be doing. It's, like I said, probably not going to be until like early next year that we're done with those two major audiobooks, and then we'll keep going from there. But thanks again. Hang in there. There's a lot of discussion going on about what does this mean in politics. I saw people also trying to claim that the Trump campaign cheated in Pennsylvania to a degree that was significant election fraud. I don't know if anything's going to come of that, if Harris is going to end up winning somehow. Regardless, this basic premise stays the same. Get out of the Democratic Party. Nothing real can happen in there. We've been harping on this for years now, and it's got to happen in mass numbers. Let me thank the chat again explicitly, because you all make this what it is. I think it's great you all are interacting with each other, and I'm happy to facilitate that. Your questions help to make the stream what it is, and that's just so much better than just me talking. So really appreciate all of you showing up. I know there's a lot of regulars in the chat. Good to see you all, and we will catch you next time.